Welcome to Ask the Expert, the Tri-City Regional Chamber of Commerce's series to help business leaders grow their companies with practical advice and answers that you can implement right away. And a special welcome to those watching remotely on Zoom as well. You're a valuable part of our audience, or you're watching in the future by recording. How is the future, by the way? No, I'm just kidding. My name is Paul Casey, and I do leadership and team development at Growing Forward Services. And I'm privileged to be your facilitator today. Also starting Monday, I'll be the Executive Director of Leadership Tri-Cities. And so thank you. And this is your year to get in the program. You got a couple weeks. So tell your company, or if you want to do it for next year for class 27, May 15th is the deadline. So see me later. This is a free benefit of your chamber membership, and it couldn't be possible without the generous sponsorship of STCU. With us today again is Sarah. Come on up here, Sarah. Let's thank STCU. You gotta stand in front of your banner.
Hey, hi everyone. I'm so thrilled to be here. I always say it every time we meet that we consider it a real privilege to sponsor this program. What a topic today. One of STCU's core values is generosity. We believe in having difficult conversations with compassion, because we know, and I'm sure you do too, that breeds success in our workplaces where you can have communication, feedback, and mindfulness, and it all works to bring people together. So thank you for being here. Thrilled to have you and all of you online. And yeah, I agree. How's the future? So
thank you, Sarah.
Remember, if you have a business card, to put it in the bowl back there.
Yes, make sure you do that because we have 2 drawings today. For approximately half of our 90 minutes together, our experts will be presenting their gold nuggets on our topic of feedback, techniques for having those difficult team conversations. And then for the second half, they will answer your questions. So if you'd like to ask a question, we would encourage everyone to think about one question while they're talking, okay? So even if you're an introvert, I'm giving you a warning. You have 45 minutes warning to think of a question today, okay? So whether you're virtual or in the room, you can text me at 509-392-1895. If you want to write down that. If you want to keep your question anonymous, or if you are on Zoom today, you can text that to me. If you're here in the room, you'll be able to raise your hand and ask a question. And if you are on virtual, please use the chat, and I will be vetting those questions and feeding them to the experts. And then they will trade the microphone back and forth, getting to as many of them as possible today. And we'll also share maybe your contact information. That's in the slides, right? Your contact information, if you want to follow up with them later with more specific questions. So let me introduce our speakers and our experts today. Tyree here in the middle. Derek has over 25 years of experience in training, development, delivery, and leadership. His master's is in human resource development from Webster University. His passion is in working with leaders at every level to become the best version of themselves in service to others. His current work involves organizational design, succession planning, and development of performance management systems as an internal consultant and performance coach. He has been married to his wife, Sue, for 40 years. They have 5 children and 4 grandchildren and reside in Liberty Lake. Thanks for making the drive down for us today. In his spare time, he's up for anything that involves being outside enjoying nature. Chanté Madsen over here is a master's prepared nurse with an emphasis in leadership and management, working at Kadlec Regional Medical Center for the last 15 years. Chanté has successfully worked in both bedside nursing and leadership capacities. She has led large and small teams of people, projects, and programs with passion and success. Currently, she is growing a new acute care unit while strengthening relationships with colleges and universities to grow the nurse extern program across the region. Chanté's strengths are communication, mentorship, team accountability, and maintaining cross-department relationships. And we got to share the stage together at the Women in Business Conference back in the fall, and I thought she's got to be here on this panel. Kristin Omberg, right here, PhD, joined PNNL in 2015. She's a manager of the Chemical and Biological Signatures Group, which comprises about 50 researchers working to develop and integrate experimental and data analytics techniques spanning chemistry, biology, and measurement science to identify and solve scientific challenges of national security importance and address emerging threats. We're glad you're here. Dr. Omberg's operational environments or used to inform, excuse me. She recently led the team that established CLIA certified high complexity testing laboratory to process COVID-19 specimens at PNNL.
You don't have to read the whole thing. I
Okay,
sent you the wrong
okay.
bio.
Oh, you did another one, okay. But this one's really cool, because I know
Okay,
that you were right there in the middle of the COVID-19
you
thing,
just
right?
make up stuff about me too. You never know.
Gotcha. In 1999, Dr. Omberg was a congressional science fellow with the U.S. Senate Committee on the Budget. She is a recipient of the R&D 100 Award for Environmental Biodetection and a fellow of the American Chemical Society. So welcome, the three of you. Thank you for giving your time to us today. We look forward to hearing about feedback. And Derek, I think you're first, right? Awesome. All right, get those questions ready. All right, here we go. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. This is great. I thank Paul, great introductions, and my fellow panel members here, lending your expertise. One of the things I know about feedback and any kind of leadership systems is there's no easy button. You're going to get some nuggets today that are great, maybe a nugget from each of us, and that's really what we come here for, is to learn some of those things. I also want to thank you for having the opportunity to talk about one of my favorite things, which is feedback and communication. Because one thing I know about leadership is communication is the key, and feedback at the very base of that communication model. So in my work at STCU, I'm responsible for developing and executing leadership development programs and for leaders and aspiring leaders. A cornerstone of our program is what we believe the leader's responsibility to provide great feedback, consistent, balanced feedback throughout a career of an employee. So if you look at a textbook definition of feedback, it says clearly stating what is wanted and expected from others, clearly expressing thoughts and ideas, and maintaining a precise and constant flow of information. So that's a textbook definition, but our definition of feedback, we're heavily influenced by Susan Scott's book, Fierce Conversations. If you haven't read it, definitely a recommended read. It's got a lot of great conversation models in that book. But we refine and reframe feedback to mean transparent, ongoing two-way conversations that spark lasting change. So rather than talk about specific techniques of providing feedback, I think we're going to hear some of that today. I'm going to focus more on some of the things we need to do to make sure trust is developed with others so that they can receive the feedback we're giving them. So bear with me. I'm going to talk about the feedback process. So there's four different pillars or constructs in this model I want to talk about. Now, in the specific classes that we teach things like, providing feedback on something very specific. What was the action they did? What could they have done differently? And those types of things. And those of you who might be familiar with DEI or Achieve Global, some of those companies, they've got some great models that are really easy to apply for most people. And we also carry some principles along with us, which is consistency. So you want to be consistent with your feedback across all channels. We want to be very specific. We also want to be timely. So one thing about feedback I know is if I'm given feedback 5 months after something happened, it's really difficult for me to reinforce any positive behaviors there. And then balanced feedback. I'd love us all to get in the habit of catching people doing something right. Instead of every time I get called into the office, it's because I've screwed up. So that's just an element of in fact, I think the ratio is like every time you provide developmental feedback, you want at least 6 opportunities of positive feedback, right? That 6-to-1 balance is pretty good. But today, I want to just share these 4 constructs. The first one is belief. Belief in others' ability to learn, grow, and improve. So we have to believe that they can make a change and they can improve. The action of building trust through engaging in curiosity and active listening. The behavior of providing feedback in a non-judgmental way, adult to adult, and to ensure accountability through taking stock, following up, and staying engaged. So those are the 4 pillars that I consider make up a great feedback model. Again, we're not going to talk about specific techniques and walking through a conversation, my part, but I just want to talk about these 4 elements that I think are important for us to have. Now, the first one is growth mindset. And growth mindset, Carol Dweck, if you're familiar with her work, I think she worked in the elementary school system, and she wrote a great book
about the growth mindset. So defined, it describes a way of viewing challenges and setbacks. People who have a growth mindset believe that even if they struggle with certain skills, their abilities aren't set in stone. They think that with work, their skills can improve over time. That's a growth mindset. So I feel that it's critically important for us to be effective in feedback, to have a growth mindset that the people can improve. It's critically important in setting the stage. I have a quick story about a mentor / college instructor who demonstrated a growth mindset when encouraging somebody who'd stop believing in himself. And that person was me. I was a non-traditional continuing ed student at a community college in Southern California. I was stationed down there in the military and taking a math class. It's been about 7 years since I had a math class. And I'm sitting in this college and all the students are finishing their exams and they're walking out. And I had a vapor lock. I don't know if you ever had one of those in a test. Just nothing's making sense. I couldn't see clearly. And so the instructor, I'm sure he had a day job. I'm sure that was a second job for him. And I'm sure he had a family or something to go home to. But he spent some extra time with me and he walked over and he said, "So what's going on? I can see you sweating and you're getting kind of nervous." And I said, "Well, I'm having a vapor lock. I know this stuff, but I can't seem to remember the right formula." So he began to take me back. Well, that was the third class, I think he said. And we started talking. He didn't give me the answer, but what he did is a series of questions. All of a sudden, wow, I've got it. Vapor lock left, and I was able to complete the problem. He changed the trajectory of my life, because who knows what would have happened if I would have flunked that class, gotten so discouraged, and never went back. But somebody cared enough, believed in my ability to grow when I didn't. And so I adopted that as a leader at my company. I believe in people, even when they don't see it themselves. And I think that growth mindset is something important for us to have. And the other thing is we want to understand that we're all on a journey. We weren't who we were yesterday, and tomorrow we won't be who we are today, right? So we're always changing and growing, constantly learning, constantly growing, constantly improving, and consistently becoming the best version of ourselves in service to something greater. So practice a little grace with people when they make mistakes. First piece of advice: remember what a challenge is to go into a new team, a new company, a new boss, and a new career, and respect them for where they're at on the journey and deal with them at that level, because they're not, if you've ever run Bloomsday or marathon or anything like that, the elite runners sometimes will finish before the rest of us even start. And sometimes we're like that on a journey. We're so far ahead of people that we forget what it was like at the very beginning. So that's where that kind of humility balance comes in. The second factor is building trust. So the trust factor, I can't overemphasize this enough. In order to build trust, it needs to start right here with ourselves. I think of a quote from one of my favorite presidents who said, "No one cares how much you know until they know how much you care." Theodore Roosevelt. And so this is really critically important to have that belief in people. You love them, you care for them, and you want the best for them. So some goals of feedback that I always have going into a conversation is I want it to be ongoing and continuous. I don't want to wait for the right moment. I want to just make sure we're having an ongoing conversation, so it becomes a shock to people. So they're used to constantly having good take stock conversations. We want to avoid anonymous feedback, third-party feedback that you don't know what the source is. I mean, why pass it on, right? If you can't validate it and can't have that. Using positive feedback to reinforce what's working well. So again, catch them doing things right. Creating a culture of candor, where candor is the expectation and trust building is strong. Honest and authentic culture. Strengthen and enrich relationships with your team, your employees, your customers. Focus on creating high-functioning teams and improving performance at the bottom of all of this through consistent, continual, and balanced feedback. And I believe that building relationships and trust with people that you lead starts with two things: active listening and curiosity. My wife and I, we went to dinner with two new friends and had a great meal. And we get done and we're driving home and she said, "Man, I can sure see why people like that couple. They're great listeners." Now, this could have been an indictment on our lack of listening skills and our need to talk all the time. But I think it was more of a confirmation that some of the greatest leaders and people that I've ever worked with are great listeners. Think about some of your best friends that you have. They're people who can really listen actively. And active listening, by the way, isn't defined as waiting for a person to stop talking so you can start talking. I'm just waiting for him to stop, because if you think about that quick answer that we give sometimes, you're not hearing the last part of the statement. You're already preparing your answer mentally. So just wait till they finish. Listen and listen for understanding. Some of our leaders at STCU struggle a little bit with listening. So we actually created a listening class, active listening, where we practice listening skills, active listening, paraphrasing, reflection, summarizing, open-ended questions. We practice some of these listening techniques. But I also believe that no one shows up to work with an intention of screwing up. I believe people want to be proud of the work they do. They want to do a good job. So we adopt Covey's fifth principle from his book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, seeking first to understand and then to be understood. This principle helps our leaders view the perspective from the employee's eyes and use curiosity, listening, and great questions to help the employee discover, grow, and learn. And so building trust, second pillar. Third pillar is no judgment. No judgment feedback. So no judgment feedback's defined, creating space for improvement and ideas, asking open-ended questions that are reflected upon later. You have space for the individuals to reflect and improve their work later on. It keeps the stream of thought open. It helps to stay away from judgment and give space to reflect. And professional to professional, they're paid to do a job and we're paid to do a job. So we're treating them as a professional, respectfully providing feedback. I had a boss a few jobs ago, and next bullet about adult to adult, he brought me into his office and he said, I want you to sit down. I've got some things to tell you. I've got some feedback to give you. You're not to say a word until I'm done. And what do you think I did? Anybody? I curled up like a turtle, right? I mean, it's like, ugh, I felt like I was in the conversation with my father. It was like, this is not working for me. We're both adults. Can we have an adult conversation? And it took a while for me to regain trust with that individual because of how that feedback went. So there's things that we want to avoid, avoiding judgmental or parental words. Things like, I'm disappointed in you. What were you thinking? Yes, but, you know, if you say but, negates everything before that, and then you're wrong. So replace it with things like, how do you think that went overall? What did you do well? Is there anything you might want to do differently next time? And instead of saying yes, but, just replace the word but with and. It makes a big difference. Yes, and, right? Yes, and. And then instead of saying you're wrong, say, you know, I see this differently. Maybe we can explore and talk about that. And it's absolutely, by the way, appropriate for you to share your observations and provide direct feedback when somebody screws up. That's totally okay. We're talking about doing it in a respectful way. So it might look something like this, you know, thank you for sharing your perspective. I understand your viewpoint. I have an observation from my viewpoint, if you care to hear it, right? And I always, as a kind of an extra measure, I know I'm the boss and I'm supposed to provide feedback, but I still always ask permission because sometimes they're not ready to receive it. They might say something like, oh, how about 5 minutes? I just need to cool down. Sometimes if you catch them right after they've had some kind of thing happen, just ask permission and give them an opportunity to respond that way. And then the last piece here is staying engaged and following up. Well, how do we know the conversation had the desired effect? Well, we don't just provide feedback and drop, right? We follow up on that. The frequency and duration of these check-ins is going to vary depending on the situation you provided feedback on. And the cadence and consistency of those meetings demonstrate your engagement in their development. That's really what it's about. Feedback is a gift for their development. So we're engaging with them. We're engaging with them through following up. We're monitoring the progress. We're adapting the approach. So if they've got some sideways angles that are going, we can redirect them. Determine whether or not the solution you discussed about has been implemented and implemented correctly, and then celebrate when they actually accomplish the goal. And if the problem is not resolved, you reflect, you learn, and you determine the next course of action. Last year, I had a development plan personally to develop my operational network. To include voices that I had been missing as I developed leadership programs. And each check-in with my boss always included a quick checkup on this opportunity. And it helped me feel her support. And I know she's just as fired up about my development and my success as she is about her own. And that kind of boss you want to keep working for. I was going to retire a couple of years ago, but I got a great boss. I think I'm going to hang out for a while, right? Because it makes that big of a difference. Somebody who believes in you, who invests in you, and is always looking out for your interest. And then it's also good to hear what they're learning about themselves through the process. You know, mistakes are great development opportunities, and some of the greatest lessons I've learned are through mistakes that I've made. There was a book that I read one time. It was about a nuclear engineer, and he screwed up something in a nuclear plant, and it cost the company like $500,000. And the board of directors said, "When are you going to fire him?" He says, "Fire him? That was a $500,000 lesson. We're going to keep him. He's never going to make that mistake again." So I'll end this section with a quote from one of my favorite people, Susan Scott, advocate of the Fierce Conversations philosophy. And she said, "There's something within us that responds deeply to people who level with us." So if you think about those true friends that level with you and tell you the stuff that maybe other people are afraid to, but they tell you the truth, you kind of know they love you, right? I mean, there's this kind of feeling like, thank you. I was getting an award when I was in the service and all dressed up in my service blues, and had to go up and shake hands with the general and get my picture taken. And my wife, right before I went up, we'd had a meal beforehand. She said, "Tooth check," right? "You've been eating salad, make sure there's nothing in there." I mean, that's somebody who was kind and loved me, and she wanted me to look the best, and she wanted me to be at my best. And that's what feedback does for us. And so I love this quote, and I guess I'll turn it over to Kristin. Thank you. Oh, Chanté. Yeah.
Super excited to be with you guys today. I'll admit a little nervous too, so smiles will help me get through. Again, thank you to my co-experts. I don't know if I'm a full expert. I'll take the title for a little bit of time, but today I wanted to talk a little bit about compassionate honesty. And so I'm going to mirror a little bit, I'll mirror a little bit of the conversations that we were able to hear from Derek, but it's important that you hear these conversations because repetitive helps us to learn. And so writing down those notes will help teach you some of these really great tools that you learned today. So one of the quotes that I have in my little binder as I work every day is, "Honesty without compassion is brutality." So we know some people who are brutally honest. To some extent, we appreciate their honesty. But compassion without honesty is enabling. So we have people who like to dance around the topics that need to be addressed, and you can't live with both. So we need to find that compassionate honesty so that we can teach people and help them grow within our organizations. And so I kind of created this little thing for women in business, and I really like the idea that really what we want to be down here is high compassion with high honesty. And this is where we're able to elevate one another. And I expect that my employees share the same type of high compassion, high honesty with me as I grow and continue to grow as a leader in our organization. And so feedback is at my 3OP on our acute care floor. It is a team goal. It is something that at the beginning of the year, we talk about what are our goals for the year? What is your personal goal? What is our team goal? And feedback is always the number one on that team goal. We talk about it regularly and honestly with one another. And so it's a commitment to one another as peers. And then it's a commitment to fill in the blank. What is your organization passionate about? Is it safety? Is it your processes? Is it principles and practices that you guys are working on and developing throughout the year? So feedback promotes that opportunity for people to learn. It gives them this education, the practices that we're working on and the principles that we live by, our mission, vision, values. You know, those are some of the things that we can work on. And then feedback also supports that just culture that helps to balance our accountability with systems thinking. And if our employees are able to think, hey, I have an ownership and making sure that our project gets done, our practice, our patients are safe, our employees are happy, our customers are wanting to come. This would be an employee-driven process. I can tell you as a bedside nurse, rarely did I ever hear from my manager feedback that I needed to grow and develop on. It was my peers that told me. When I was given a report and handing off to the next nurse, they would point out things that I missed either the day prior or something that I didn't talk about, and they would hold me accountable to that. I've had times where they would call me just as I was walking out of the building, hey, I need you to come back so you can document this piece. It's important because we have regulatory agencies coming in. We need you to insert this information in there so that our patients are safe and we're showing them that we're practicing safe practices. So rarely did I ever hear feedback from my manager. It was from my peers, and it was expected that I give them that feedback as well. They would ask for it. So how do you get your team to get engaged in giving peer-to-peer feedback? One of the things that I talk about is I define what a peer is. And I very specifically tell my employees that I am their peer. We are all equal on that level when it comes to feedback. I am not above receiving feedback and learning and growing from my mistakes that I made. I'm human. So I also round with my employees monthly or bi-monthly, just depending upon where I'm at with them. And I talk to them very candidly about what are my blind spots. Please share with me what I am not seeing that needs to be addressed. And I ask them, what are your blind spots? What are areas that you need to grow in and develop? And so that helps to open up a table of, if I'm asking for that feedback, they're going to give it to me, and then they're going to start getting comfortable with asking for feedback. And so before you know it, instead of people having to give that feedback, we're just figuring out what's going on and we're working through the processes. Another key component to feedback is that it's practice focused. It is not a personal judgment. We should never be afraid of giving feedback to one another, because again, it's not personal. It's about our safety, our policies, our practices, the expectations, our mission, vision, values. And so you're always driving it back to those key pieces. It's never personal. And there's value in realizing what had transpired to create that failure so that you guys can overcome it. So it's learning from other people's mistakes and sharing that with others. We have huddles at our hospital and we talk about what's going on. And that's an opportunity where I share, hey, this is a learning opportunity. This is something that we learned recently about a miss. Systems failure, and we talk about it very openly. I might not say who it was with or what patient it impacted, but we talk about it very openly, and that is a form of feedback because everyone is able to engage and say, I've done that, or that could have been me. And so we're able to preemptively keep our patients and our customers safe. But our tone is so crucial in this area. If I'm coming at you like really harsh, that brutally honest area, people are going to shut down. We all come to the table with trauma, whether we lived in an amazing home or it was very traumatic. And so all of us have little bits of trauma that we come to. And so making sure that you're watching that body language to see, oh, I need to shift my tone, and making sure that I'm able to help engage with this employee. Our frequency of feedback needs to be regular, timely, and continuous. And so the more you give feedback, the more comfortable you're going to get more often you're going to give it. But really what I tell my employees is, if you're not comfortable with giving feedback, start with asking for that feedback. When your peers start hearing like, oh, she's willing to hear what's going on wrong, or hear what ways she can grow and improve, I'm going to be comfortable with giving her. She wants it. She wants to grow and improve. We need to make sure that feedback to one another is a part of the learning culture. And so as long as we are continuous with our expectation, the best practices, safety processes, and the policies that we're working with, people are going to continually ask for that feedback. It's going to be about those 4 things. It's not personal. It's about learning and growing and making sure everyone feels safe to fail. It's okay to fail. I have personally failed a lot, and I've learned from those experiences. Just like Derek said, feedback should not be anonymous. There is no room for anonymity. So when I tell my employees that come to me, so-and-so, we're having issues with so-and-so, I will ask them, what have you told them? If you identified that issue, what have you told them to help them grow? And oftentimes there's a big gulp and they're like, oh, nothing yet. So then I coach them up and I say, okay, let's talk. Let's have a dialogue. Let's see how we can get to this conversation. Because there's nothing worse than me saying, come into my office. Your peers are telling me X, Y, Z. You're not listening to anything that I'm telling you because all you're thinking about is who's talking about me, why are they coming to you? Why didn't they come tell me? And so that doesn't allow them to have dialogue, to clarify what happened. Maybe there was a reason why it happened the way it happened. And there was no gaining of understanding because they've shut down immediately. So just like Derek said, we also wanted to and make sure that we're thinking about the developmental stage of our employee. So with our new employees, I tell them regularly, you are going to be receiving feedback regularly over the next 6 months to a year. If you're not getting feedback, there's a concern. So they know to anticipate, I'm going to be hearing something a lot. With our seasoned staff, they may not hear it as often, but what they will hear, instead of going into the details about the why and where you can find the policy and how to find those resources to help support them, they're going to hear, hey, our policy is, or it just updated, you might not have known. And their conversation is quick and super easy and it flows really well. So as I was thinking over the weekend about talking about feedback, just creating that culture where a person can feel loved to receive that feedback or give that feedback, I was able to think about some of these, the word just slipped my mind. Thank you, acronym. So when you're giving feedback, you want to lead with love. So leading with your compassion, making sure that you are giving the feedback in a tone and in a way that you would want to receive it personally. You want to observe your body language. We know body language speaks more than what our words are even saying. If I'm nervous up here, you're going to see I'm nervous up here because I'm fidgeting or I talk with my hands a lot. And so I'm able to share with you more than what you're hearing out of my mouth. Our voice. So making sure that we're voicing the safety component, voicing the policy or the process component that's missing. We're talking about the process again, not the person. And then we want to emphasize what our expectations are. They're not going to be able to know how to grow or where to grow to if we're not going to follow up and say, okay, now that we've learned, here's where we need to be. And I'm going to help you get there. And then on the opposite end, when we receive feedback, we need to receive it in love. I can tell you, actually by a show of hands, who's given feedback to someone who was not willing to accept it? How uncomfortable is it to try to give someone feedback when they're like this? Or when they're like, well, I don't agree with that. And so we need to remember that when someone's coming to us, they're uncomfortable to give us that feedback and we need to receive it in love. And so one way is to lean into our discomfort. One of the books that we have out there on raffle today is by Brene Brown, and it's called Atlas of the Heart. And the reason why I put that book out there is because it really taught me a lot about my uncomfortable feelings that I get when I receive feedback. And it really dives into the root of the problem, and it helps me to identify ways that I can overcome and grow that. We also want to observe our body language. If we're sitting like this and someone's talking to us and trying to give us feedback, they're not going to want to give us feedback again. It's very uncomfortable. We need to validate the truth in their feedback. We have to remember that there's 3 truths: your truth, my truth, and then the actual truth. So though you may not appreciate who's giving you the feedback, we have to know that there's some truth hidden in there. And so we have to really observe our own thoughts and find that truth. And then we need to express gratitude to the giver. And so thank them. Thank you for sharing that with me. I appreciate that. Last but not least, this is something I tell my employees as well. I always liken feedback to a vaccine or a shot that we receive. Initially, it stings and it might hurt for a second, and then your ego is bruised for a couple days. You feel it. But in the long term or the grand scheme of things, if you're able to reflect on that feedback, we're strengthening our safety culture, we're strengthening our one-on-one culture, and we're making sure that everyone is on the same page, performing at the same level, and that level of excellence, which is always a moving bar. So if you can think about it that way, it will help you to receive feedback and give that feedback.
I'm Kristin. I'm going to tell you some stories today because I have some spectacular feedback fails, frankly, in my career. The first time I gave feedback, I was just reflecting on this, was 2005. And first I want to say that this is not the opinion of my employer. Okay, so these opinions are mine alone, and my employer, any of the employers that I've had before this. But, back in 2005, I worked at an organization that had literally no culture of feedback. And I became a manager and I had to give feedback, and it was a pretty bad failure. So I'm going to use it to illustrate some of the points I'm going to talk about today. But where I work now, we say feedback is a gift, and it's a gift that doesn't come with a gift receipt, right? It's a gift you can't re-gift. And so I started looking for better analogies, and I found this one, which is that feedback is like sunshine, right? So in certain amounts, it's great. Some people are gonna apply a light coat of sunscreen when you give them that feedback, and some people are gonna shrink away from you like they're a vampire, right? Because sunlight, if it's not given to you in the right place at the right time, it burns. And so I actually think that that's a great analogy that I want to use moving forward. So in 2005, I became a manager of a group of people, and I was relatively young, and I had a gentleman in my group who was 70 years old. And that's relevant because he had actually worked with the company I worked for more than 40 years. And we accrued sick leave. So Norm had 4,000 hours of sick leave. I'm not changing any of the names because mostly, you know, it's me, and Norm's retired now. So Norm had 4,000 hours of sick leave. And in 2003, Norm's house burned down. And he stopped coming to work on days when things were due. But he had 4,000 hours of sick leave, right? So there wasn't a whole lot that we could do. And we had a culture where nobody talked to him about it. Everybody knew and nobody said anything. So they just started giving him smaller and smaller things and less important things. And at raise time, Norm would actually walk around, ask everybody what their raise was and complain about how bad his was. But nobody talked to Norm. So when I became a manager, I thought, this has gotten to the point where it's unkind, right? The fact that no one has told him that this is a problem is really unkind. And so I engaged HR, I sat down with Norm. And we had a conversation, and I'm going to use that conversation, which went on for several months, to illustrate some of these points today. So when feedback doesn't go well, and I'll tell you right now, Norm retired. So in my opinion, that feedback failed. The first thing you want to do when feedback failed is ask yourself, did I give specific feedback? So have you ever gotten, okay, I'll give the ladies, have you ever gotten the feedback, you should smile more? Okay, that's possibly the worst piece of feedback ever. Okay. But I know a lot of women over their careers who've gotten that piece of feedback. What do you do with that? Do you know? Nobody knows what to do with that. So when I'm giving feedback, I like to use the STAR model. So I will typically say something like, Norm, when you have a deliverable due, there's a situation and a task, and you call in sick instead of coming in on the day that's due, there's an action. The result is that your coworkers don't want to give you the next task. So STAR feedback, because that's actionable, that gives them something to do. It's not, you know, your coworkers, they think that you're a little pushy in meetings, right? It's when you're in a meeting and you interrupt someone, that makes them feel like you don't value their contribution. And that makes them less likely to talk to you in the future. So always think about what is the feedback you're giving. And I love the STAR model because it helps them see when you do something, this other thing happens. And I think Chanté was talking about this a bit when she was talking about, you know, when you leave early and you don't complete something, right? That puts us in jeopardy. So you need to come back and complete it. That's an excellent example of STAR feedback. The second thing I like to wonder when my feedback fails is, did he just understand the example I gave? Did they just understand the example I gave? Do I need to rephrase it? Do I need to use another example? So the first time I told Norm, when you call in sick, when you have a deliverable due, it makes the team feel like they can't count on you. He said, well, I don't know when that happened. Okay, so we can go pull some things and we can talk them through. Oh, well, I was sick. Okay, we can talk through that too, right? But sometimes sometimes you're using an example that doesn't resonate with the individual. Or one of the things that I hear a lot when I give feedback about someone's interaction with someone is, well, you know, they're really unpleasant, right? Or Well, 5 years ago, they did something that made me not want to work with them. And so because of that, so lots of times, helping find other examples or rephrase the example until they actually understand what you're saying is a useful technique. Was I direct enough and did I confuse the message? So this is the compassion honesty scale, right? Two things that I see managers do a lot is, that didn't go really well, or you should think about that, right? Or something along those lines. So that's sort of giving feedback, but not really. It's not very direct. The other thing that I see them do a lot is, Norm, you've done a terrible job delivering through the last year. But on the other hand, you're a really pleasant guy, right? So I see a lot of people obscure it, where they give the direct feedback and then they sort of recant and say, but I'm sure that it's all fine. And lots of times people, they won't hear the direct message if you put that pleasant message on the back end. I always like to start with the pleasant message if I can, and then go to the harder one, because at least that way, I've sort of softened them up, but I'm not leaving them with the impression that everything is good. So when I get feedback and it fails, I like to ask, did I actually give them specific and actionable feedback? Do I need to rephrase it or use another example? Did they understand what I was saying? Was I direct enough? And we'll talk a little bit in a moment about directness and different people. And did I subsequently confuse my message by either putting in a different message or slightly walking it back? All right, so Norm didn't improve over the next week. And he had a deliverable due that week, but he didn't improve. So I brought Norm back into my office. I said, hey, Norm, great example, right? This week you had that thing due and you called in sick on Thursday and Friday. And so they just went ahead and did it for you. Okay, that was good to do because it gave him another example. But was it fair to expect him to change his behavior in a week? Probably not, right? So feedback in that case failed, but in a way, I think that was probably on me, because I didn't give him a chance to practice and I didn't express any expectations with him. I didn't say, Norm, when we left our first conversation, Norm, within the next month, I want to see you get to the point where you are not calling in sick every week, right? That would have been a clear expectation on my part, and you're getting your deliverables in. So am I being reasonable on the feedback? Did I express clearly what I want to see, or what would be a good resolution to this problem? And did I give him enough time to actually run through the experiment, try an alternative action, and come up with an alternative result? And then, are your expectations for progress fair? When you're giving someone feedback and it's not taking, I like to revisit, okay, what have I told them? What am I expecting of them? Do they know that? And have I given them enough time to actually think about how to do that? Because lots of times when we express feedback, I used to have an HR person who said the hardest part of feedback is that they don't have to take it, right? The hardest part of feedback is you can't make them do it. And that's why it's so hard to give feedback to your own family, right? Because you're very invested in that and you really want them to just change. But you can't expect to change overnight if it's a pattern of behavior. All right, so the second thing I always ask now is, was I kind? Did I provide feedback at an appropriate time and place? I have to tell you, in 2005, I gave Norm absolutely no warning. I put a meeting on his, because I was not very good at this. I put a meeting on his calendar. He walked in, it was me and HR, and I said, hey, Norm, for the last 2.5 years, you haven't delivered anything. That was probably, that was probably actually not as kind as I could have been in that situation. I could have started out with, hey, Norm, we need to have a serious conversation at some point in the next week or two. Do you have a good day that would be preferable to you? Now, granted, he probably would have called in sick because he was Norm, but I could have started out that way instead of barreling right into it. Did I put them on the defensive? Have you ever given someone feedback and you look at them and they're doing deer in the headlights at you, right? When I first gave Norm this feedback, he actually didn't get it. But the second time I gave him that feedback, I clearly put him on the defensive. He looked at me like I was a school teacher telling him that he had done something wrong. And then he promptly went to my manager and told my manager that it was really difficult to work with me. So I put him on the defensive in doing that. I could have done a lot of different things. I could have addressed this a lot of different ways. I could have said, hey, Norm, tell me about your work, right? I could have done a lot of things that could have gotten him there without my putting it into a situation where it was, Kristin is difficult and I don't want to work with her anymore. And then have I followed up to offer support? I'm going to admit now, I don't think I ever asked Norm what help he needed. But saying, okay, I'm here to help. What do you need, Norm? What do you need to help you do your job? Would have been a great thing to do. And as we discussed in earlier presentations, giving someone follow-up and offering to help them figure out how to implement the feedback, I have found is really critical, in part because sometimes they need it, but always because you're on their team, right? And it establishes this is not you. This is not me telling you you need to do something different. This is us working together to try to make this right. So in the case of dealing with Norm, it was definitely me. Okay, there were definitely many things in there that I could have done differently, but I also like to think through this whenever I have given feedback and it's not working. Sometimes I do everything right and it still doesn't work. So then the question is it them? Is it Norm? So then I like to ask myself, do they have the skills to change? Right now, I have a couple of folks that we're integrating into projects, and they probably need a couple of extra skills to succeed on those projects. So if I give them feedback and say, you know, you don't have a PhD, right? That's not very useful. If I give them feedback and say, it would be great if you brushed up a little bit on AI ML techniques. That gets to something actionable and the skills. So am I talking to somebody who has the skills to make the change I'm looking for? And if not, do they have the ability to acquire them? And what can I do to help them get there? How can I help them learn? Whether it's you know, an emotional intelligence class, or whether it's some soft skills training, or whether or not it's technical skills training, how do I help them get to where they need to be? Sometimes they don't seem to have the skills to change. And this has, I think, become much more common for me in the last 3 years. Then I have to ask, do they have the capacity to change? So one question is, do they buy in? I have, over my career, had a lot of people say, well, it's not me, it's them. It's not me, it's you, but it's also you, and it's you in the back, and it's you over there. It's me against all of you, and you're all wrong. Right? So sometimes they don't buy in. Sometimes they don't believe that feedback's useful. I have had people tell me that my feedback meetings are a waste of their time, which is okay. That's their right in feedback to say, you know what, that wasn't useful to me, and maybe there are things that I could have done differently in those meetings. Sometimes I have people say, you know what, I'm not sure that I agree with all of that, but I'm going to go think about it. I try to do that when I'm being my best person and somebody gives me feedback I don't like. I try to do that. Okay, I don't need to agree or disagree right now. I can take this and I can go think about it. But I like to ask myself, do they have the capacity to change? Do they buy in? And do they believe this is valuable? And then one thing I'm hearing more from my staff these days is, I think I probably do need to change something, but I'm not capable of doing that right now. So since the pandemic, I have found a lot of people are just tapped out. And if it's something that's easy, if it's something that's like, I need you to make sure that you do this, you do safe check at the end of the day, right? Then I can often get people to say immediately, yes, that's absolutely right. You know, I'll put that on my calendar. I have a way of doing that. But where it is harder change, where it's, for example, I notice you interrupt a lot in meetings and you really need to do some rebuilding of bridges with your coworkers. Sometimes I've got people who are just saying, you know, I have a lot going on right now, and I am not at a place where I feel like I can invest a whole lot. So if the answer to that is, I don't have the capacity to change right now, then you have to ask, okay, is this something that we can just get through for now? And maybe it's something to do in the future. And the third thing I like to ask is it all of us? Is it a culture issue? Does the person want to be here? It's really hard to get somebody to invest in changing a behavior if fundamentally they don't want to be there. Do they trust their coworkers? This is something that, I don't know what your workplaces are like, but scientists have a very complex culture. And there are people who've been holding grudges for 10 years at my previous laboratory. And so sometimes the problem is people are giving them feedback, they don't trust any of it anymore. Right? And that is a really hard problem to overcome. And sometimes it's that they don't share your core values. So Chanté was talking very nicely about how one of their core values, I believe, is giving feedback. And my first organization that I worked in where I had to give feedback to Norm, there was no culture of feedback there. It was not a core value there. Growth mindset was not a core value. Continuous improvement was not a core value. Scientific excellence was a core value. And if you were scientifically excellent, everything else kind of slid on that. So in that case, Norm was actually right on with the culture. I was a little bit off with the culture of that. But I always like to ask then, is it a culture issue? Because if it's me, I can change that. If it's you, I can see what I can do for you. I can see if I can change me and that changes you, right? If it's a larger thing, if it's us and it's a culture issue, then sometimes the best feedback that you can give is, I'm not sure that this is a great fit, right? I'm not sure that this is going to be a great fit long-term, and we might want to think about some other options here. So with that, you can text call Casey if you have any questions.
Okay, if you're here in the room, we'll take your questions first, and those on Zoom, I'll be vetting those as well. But we've got one here in the room. Be sure to speak very loudly so we can pick it up on the microphone as well. I'll kick off with one. The sandwich principle, good or bad? What do y'all say? But some of you have talked about leading with the positives. Some say the end with it gives a confusing message. What do y'all think?
I think there's a temporal aspect to the sandwich, right? I think the good on both sides of the bad is effective, but I think you have to know the audience. And what I often like to do is, one of the things that I have been taught over the years is shine and polish. So in that case, shine is an adjective and polish is a verb. I always have to remember that because they're very similar. But you really shone, Paul, you really shine at bringing people together. Polish, I don't know a polish for you, but you could perhaps do something different, okay? But then if I turn around and go, but really you're a great guy, you're probably gonna get those two messages that were positive instead of the one in the middle, unless you're like some of my guiltier staff who will immediately focus on whatever it is they did wrong and ignore the other two. So I think that in some ways you have to know the staff person, you have to know the person you're talking to. But also lots of times what I like to do is I like to do the shine, but you need to polish. Let's talk more tomorrow. And that then gives me the opportunity to, if they come in, for example, and they've had some really good reflection about the feedback I gave them, you can say, I really appreciate that you took the time to think about that. And I can give them that next polish, but then I'm reinforcing the behavior that I hope to get instead of discounting the message I just delivered.
Thank you.
I guess I'll go.
Yeah.
What, you brought up one of my questions, do they want to be there? Like, what would you guys say is the best way to kind of offer feedback to an employee that just doesn't want to be there? To get them to perform at the level they should be performing?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think for me, it starts with setting expectations. Really have to be crystal clear, because when you have crystal clear expectation, it's a lot easier to have that conversation because you're both aware of where we fell short. And so for me, as a boss, as a leader, it's my job to provide alignment. And so I start the conversation there is we're out of alignment. I want to have a conversation about how we get back in alignment and get back on track. And so, and sometimes I do ask permission, is this a good time for us to talk? If not, maybe this afternoon, and schedule some time together. And I loved your example of just hitting up Norm and saying, hey, come in the room,
It's 8 a.m., man.
yeah, 8 a.m.
Let's get it changed.
Friday afternoon at 3, worst time to give feedback, right?
Yep.
So, and bring a box, that's not good. So yeah, that's what I would say. I mean, it is really our job and really setting those expectations up front. So there's good clarity and that continuous and ongoing elements important too.
Can I add on to that? I think that also identifying what that caregiver's growth potential is. Where do you want to grow? Where do you see yourself growing? Some of our organizations have lots of areas where they can grow, and it may not be within your own lane. It may be that they can really shine in another area. So identifying what are their strengths, where do they see themselves in the next couple of months to years, and how can we get you there?
Thank you.
I have a question. So going from being coworkers with someone and then being then in the lead position where they now report to you. And now we were friends, but now taking on that leadership role, I always hear like, okay, now you can't really be friends with that person. You have to kind of take a step back, but then does that break the trust that you've built as coworkers versus manager and employee? Or how to go about that?
Oh, I was just gonna say, I'm consider myself friends with everybody. You're an Enneagram fan, I'm a 2, so I'm friends with everybody. I just want to be like. But for me, I've been in that experience and the friendship changed, but it didn't go away. You just have to I have to keep in mind the balance. I couldn't, there's certain things like I couldn't go out to lunch with them all the time, things like that, because you have to kind of step back from that a little bit. But once you become friends with somebody, it's hard to turn the friendship button off. You just have to take some extra steps to protect yourself from any type of preferential treatment, things like that. So there's just things you have to be careful of, but I don't think you have to give up your friends. Yeah.
My previous job was in a town of 25,000 people with a lab that employed 15,000. So it really compounded that problem.
And Norm is your neighbor.
Norm lived within a mile. But I knew people who had to fire the people who were currently ferrying their children to their violin lessons in a carpool. Right. It was awkward on all kinds of levels. And I think there are a couple of things to keep in mind. And the one thing I think I underestimated the most is when you become the manager, they see you differently. You don't see you differently necessarily, but they see you differently and they see your actions differently. And so you have to be careful to make sure that you're thinking about how are my actions going to be perceived. When I call this person into my office and I say, you really messed that thing up, right? How are they going to take it now that I'm their manager and not their friend? And so I think you have to almost wear multiple hats and be able to shift them back and forth. And part of it is managing that perception, but part of it is managing your understanding of the dynamic.
So Kristin, you shared how to give feedback when somebody doesn't want to hear it. Chanté, Derek, what else would you say if somebody just doesn't want to hear it?
I've had an experience recently with a caregiver who had no desire to hear what I had to share with them. And it did make it challenging because I had that natural desire to help them grow and flourish, but they saw me as the enemy. So it was very challenging to overcome that. And ultimately what I decided was, just as Kristin shared in her slides, I have nothing to be able to offer to this caregiver because of just the situation that we're in. She could be the best employee under a different type of leader because we are not speaking the same language at this time. And so I had to come to that own resolve within myself. You take it personally. Gosh, I can talk to anybody, and why am I not breaking through with this one? And so just personally being okay with you're not going to be successful in every situation. And sometimes it's the best to let them grow somewhere else.
I have a note on my desk. Paul may know this. I may have told him this, that it says, what are my expectations of myself? And I often look at it in times like that, because usually my expectation is that I will do better every day than I did previously, and everything will be spectacular. So when I go in to give feedback, my expectation is it's gonna rock, right? We're gonna hug. They're gonna change. I think Chanté is right, that lots of times you get really invested in helping, in giving the feedback. And that's not necessarily your most effective place to be. You have to then be able to detach and say, well, you know what? This might not be workable this time.
In a perfect culture, employees would give feedback to each other so that the boss doesn't have to be the referee all the time, right? So how do you teach employees to feel comfortable giving feedback to their peers? To have just more of an accountable culture in general.
I'll start. What we've tried to do with our program of feedback is it's offered to everyone. So we want all of our staff to be able to provide 360 feedback. And I say that because I, have talked with our CEO, and my boss is the executive vice president. I've had conversations with him. I'm actually managed up. My boss had to do a conference presentation. She got back from it. I said, well, how did it go? What'd you do well? And she said, you're slipping into coaching essentials. I said, absolutely. It's a 360 model. So we want everybody to have the same skills so that it becomes more ingrained for us. It becomes part of our DNA. So that coaching, feedback, authentic culture is something we just start early, start often, and we just keep reinforcing it. And recognize that when it's happening, like a person that I work with, she constantly provides me feedback. And, it's like, well, thank you, and tell me more, because I want to grow, and I'm in the fourth quarter of my career, but I still want to grow and learn and to continue to be a better version. So I think that's a big piece of it, just culturally infuse it the best you can.
I actually start from my interview process. When I'm talking, I interview them, and then we go to the end of, do you have any questions? And I say, I want to talk to you about some of our culture and expectations. If this is something that you feel you can be passionate about, if offered the opportunity in this role, this is something that would be an expectation. First day orientation or first week orientation, I meet with that caregiver. We go over pretty much a lot of what I've shared with you. What are those expectations of feedback? Asking for it regularly, giving it regularly. You will be hearing it regularly over the next 6 to 12 months. And so and then annually they hear it from me. So, and then again, when they come to me and they're like, so-and-so's not doing this, I will ask them, what have you shared with them? What feedback have you given them? I do not take that from them. I allow them to grow.
Here's a sticky situation. How best to give feedback to an employee who retaliates to me and their peers after they get negative feedback? So their peers don't want to give feedback because they know things are going to be difficult for a while, and they just don't think it's worth it anymore.
Someone write that one for me.
I think first, some of the best advice I've ever given is that you can't give feedback effectively when you're emotionally attached to a situation. And that sounds fraught to me, right? So I would say, first off, you've got to get yourself to a really good place where you don't have that fear and you don't have that anxiety about giving feedback. And I would also look really carefully at how I was giving feedback. And sometimes people are just difficult and I don't get them. But sometimes I know. So, I did not give feedback to Norm as well as I could have. And he went and talked to my boss about how difficult I was. Okay, there were some things I could do to improve there. So I would look at, is there a different way to give it? I would make sure that I'm not emotional before I go give it. And I would also give that feedback along with it, which is that it's hard for me to give you feedback because I feel like you don't take it well. And if there's anything that you can give me feedback on better ways to interact with you, I would appreciate that. So I would weave that in.
And if I could add to that too, you can always expect one of three responses from people who provide feedback. They either deny it, This didn't happen. They defend their action, what they did, or they deflect to somebody else. Well, how come you're not talking to Joan or Bill or something? And so for me, just being aware that those three reactions can come out. And just understanding that in Susan Scott's book, she gives an example of this person that kept trying to deflect to other people. And she kept bringing them back, said, thank you, but we're here to talk about your behavior, and just kept bringing it back. And I think you said it, Chanté, it's not personal. This is a specific situation we need to address, and we're just bringing it back to that. So they kept flying all over the map, and she just kept bringing them back to the issue, So that upfront clarity around what they're there to talk about, that might be helpful, but I certainly don't envy that person.
What are the three responses again, Derek? Did you say accept, be defensive, and deflect?
Deny, defect,
Deny.
deflect, and defend.
3 Ds. Okay. 2 questions on leading up, giving feedback up. What would be your recommendations on doing that? Which could be, sort of a dicey situation.
Well, I'm gonna certainly ask permission.
I think once you start to establish that expectation that, we give each other feedback, no one really is immune from that. I think it's just the approach in which you share that. Oftentimes we have one-on-ones with our core leader, and that's not an amazing time to share your wins, share what you're working on, and then share some concerns that you might need addressed. Being able to send that out, a day prior to the meeting allows them to reflect on potentially what you guys are going to be talking about, if you're able to address that within that meeting minute, and then the two of you can come together and have a conversation. And again, I always approach it with how I would want to receive it. And you can never go wrong when you're coming from the heart. And so I think just preparing the person who's going to be receiving that feedback will help. You're going to feel uncomfortable, and that's okay. Be comfortable with feeling uncomfortable. That's how you're going to get through it.
Best approach to get used to feedback when the previous experiences have all been negative in the company. How can we start making now the culture of people getting used to feedback instead of, they give you some feedback, gonna get smashed.
Give positive feedback too in the same way.
Yes.
That's one of my, you were mentioning the ratio, right? Give positive feedback in the same way, but also lots of times people take feedback really personally. And it's important, I think, to figure out in a situation where you think somebody's going to be squirreling, how to take it away from you did this and it's wrong to I want to help you understand something, or I want to help you do better at something, or I want you to help me understand what happened in this situation, so that you take it away from the personal and put it more on that spectrum of trying to improve.
I think self-reflection is key here too, like she's leading into that book that I referenced, Brene Brown's Atlas of the Heart. That was really, it's a really interesting read. It's a very different read for a book. It's very simple, very easy to go through, but it also helps you to reflect on when I'm feeling anxious, what is anxiety rooted in? So if you can identify what your root emotion is, you're able to work through that trauma. We all come to it differently. We think about how our mom came to us, how our dad came to us, how our siblings attacked us, our first job. We bring all of that with us wherever we go. So if we can identify what those roots emotions are, we can say, okay, it's all right, little Chanté, it's okay. You're going to be all right. Let's listen, let's go through this and let's make this experience different.
How do you talk with a supervisor who always defends or deflects, using 2 of your Ds there?
Yeah, I actually have an experience with a supervisor like that, and it was finally just realizing I couldn't do it anymore. We couldn't keep the relationship going. And so I had a conversation about the relationship, about saying, if we're gonna have a productive relationship, you know, I'm not telling you this stuff because I don't think you're a great boss. I'm telling you this stuff because I want the best out of you, just like you want the best out of me. And it wasn't an easy conversation for me to have. I was super nervous about it, but, you know, this is a person that I trusted. This is a person that I wanted him to show his best. And it's finally why I just opened up and said, I want you to succeed. I'm not doing this because I want your job. I want you to succeed. And so for me, it was just that kind of confrontation moment where, and you know, I guess it's not easy, but it was at that point. So
Let's step back and have a conversation about the
Yeah.
conversations we're having.
that's right,
It's like,
exactly.
step back.
I would also ask myself, what am I doing in the approach? Maybe that's just because I'm an expressive and I like to jump right into things and then I feel like everything's fine, right? I
Mhm.
told you how I feel and now we all move on, which is not always true. But I like to ask, how am I approaching this? And am I starting this conversation correctly? Am I giving them feedback in a way that is a way that they can accept it? Or am I triggering something in, you know, my little boss that makes them want to defend or deflect? And is there a way that I could do this differently?
And I think I mentioned somewhere, but just the humility aspect of it. I mean, I think we can all identify with screwing up really bad. And when you screwed up really bad, you kind of understand what they're going through when they go through that. Even your boss that might have a big screw up, you get it, you've been there. And I think that just humble approach is helpful as well. Because I mean, I don't think anyone in the room here would consider themselves world-class feedback person, right? We're all on this journey. We're all learning and growing. That's why we're here talking about it. So, yeah.
The other thing I guess I would say is I would watch the actions. I have had some feedback sessions with people where they immediately explained to me exactly why my viewpoint was wrong, right? But surprisingly, I saw a change in behavior moving forward. So you can have a feedback session that seems combative or that seems deflective, but there may actually be something going on there that you don't see. So I like to have, even when I've had a meeting that I think I really tanked it on, I always like to be optimistic that I'm wrong.
I love it.
Just giving them a voice.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
loosen it up, right? Loosen it, yeah.
Yes.
Unclog the artery. Okay, so in this case, a previous manager forced employees to confront each other and said, this is feedback. So now there's lots of lack of trust, fear, and grudges.
Oh, wow.
So now that's the culture. How do you dig out from that scenario with all that negativity? Where would you start? You're a consultant coming in and saying, okay, hi, everyone.
I would reread 5 Dysfunctions of a Team.
No, that's a good one.
Actually, and
Recommend.
and that whole structure of what happens when you don't have trust. But that's hard.
And I think if you're the leader of that group, you just start by being humble and authentic and taking ownership. I allowed this to happen. You know, this was on my watch and we're going to be different. And here's some things we need to start doing differently and how we need to start respecting each other differently. So it's kind of like a triage of culture. It really is an infusion of some healthy attitudes and healthy behaviors. That's a challenging one.
I think also reminding that we can be honest, but we can be brutal. And that's not the place that we're going. That's not the direction we're going. And we're not going to be enablers. We're not going to dance around the issue. But we're going to come at it with a compassionate honesty, which is truthful and it's shared in a tone in which the person can receive. And so there will be feedback if the feedback that we are receiving is not following that standard.
Personality styles. Do you tailor your message depending on the personality styles? You know, sometimes or that driver, that lion likes it being blunt. Others need to be walked into the scenario gently, maybe a softer approach. Can you talk about learning about how people best receive feedback and maybe custom treating them?
we actually have a thing called a jumpstart conversation where that's one of the questions is how do I like to give and receive feedback? And so I do take definitely for those who I work with that are a lot more direct and want it straight to the point. I can use a little bit more candor, a little bit more straightness, and then others, you know, you need to caress it a little bit more. And so I still have the same message, but I do adapt the approach a little bit. Because I found, especially with my boss and the person who reported to me, who were both very direct and very fast moving people. If I try dancing around things, they're just kind of leaning in. What do you want to say? So I realized that I did have to adapt, and that's been a process for me over the career, just learning how each person needs to receive feedback. So what's so important to us that we just put it on the check-in. We just said, how do you like to receive feedback? We get that out of the way so that we know.
To piggyback off of that, what if you have someone that is a very emotional person when getting feedback? Like they instantly like tears, like no matter like if it's a very small issue or a big issue, it's constant, like the emotions are right there in your face. And the first few times it's like, okay, like I understand, pat you on the back, but it's get to the point where it's like, okay, like we're just trying to get you better and trying to get through this. Like it's almost like a whole theatric production. Any advice about that?
I always have Kleenex. And I will plan for those meetings. I actually used to have a guy who cried in my office every time I gave him a really good performance appraisal. Right, and then he would explain why he didn't deserve it. And there was clearly some stuff going on in there. And so I always have Kleenex. You know, if it becomes recurring, I will often suggest that perhaps there are some support resources that they could access. We have an employee assistance program. You know, that is some people's reaction to feedback all the time. And so I try to just build that in now if I know. And then I call it a victory if they don't cry.
Well, and maybe even some just-in-time feedback, right? I mean, so it's not always sitting in front of the desk, it's just in a hallway and it's private and you have an opportunity just to provide just that just-in-time feedback. It makes it a little less threatening.
That's really interesting. Yeah, trying to get at what is it about this setting that makes you cry? Which is a really blunt way of asking the question, so I wouldn't add, but are you putting them in a situation where they're not going to respond well? And is there a better way to do it?
And I would just let them know, hey, as your core leader, my goal is to support you in growth. And you're going to hear a lot of feedback from me. Some of it will be on the fly when, you know, something happens and we catch it real time. I'm able to come to you and talk to you. Sometimes it's going to be in our office. We're going to have more of a detailed conversation. You can explain things to me. But it sounds like we need to practice giving and receiving feedback a little bit more to one another. How do you like to give feedback so that it can be productive and help for your growth? And so the more you practice with this individual, the more accustomed they'll get to doing it and safe. They'll start to build that trust with you.
I love that practice. We're going to practice receiving feedback. So a big thing in leadership now is authenticity and vulnerability. So how do you think a leader can actually be too authentic, too vulnerable in these feedback settings?
No, this morning. No, I don't think so. This morning I was having some feedback with a caregiver and she identified an area where I messed up. And I was very frank and honest. Thank you for sharing that with me. And I apologize for my part and what transpired to cause this to happen. There's that trust that is built when you're able to be authentic and real. My caregivers have only seen it a couple of times where Chanté turns into more assertive Chanté. It doesn't happen very often, but when it happens, they know, oh, okay, this is different. We need to sit and really talk about it. So the authentic Chanté always leads, and rarely does it ever come out to where like, no, we're not talking like this. We're not doing this right now. And that tone changed. They're like, okay, let's go talk somewhere else so we can have a good conversation about this.
I agree, and I will add on to that, not knowing the situation that this person is coming from. That one of the things that I have been focusing on lately is Brene Brown and the discussion of being vulnerable and authentic and having boundaries. right?
But being able to rumble, right?
And being able to rumble. And so I think sometimes people conflate vulnerable and authentic with either not having boundaries or not setting expectations. And so I think you have to hold those all together, particularly if you're in a situation where you're a manager or somebody, you can say, this whole thing just feels icky, right? But I'm not letting you off the hook.
I would answer, I would agree with both the others. For me, I've always been who I was, and I just go with what God gave me. And so I was told at one time that I had too much heart to get up to the next level of the company. And I said, well, I would rather have the heart I have and stay at the level I'm at than change who I am. So yes, vulnerability and authenticity is something I strongly believe in, and it just has to be core to who you are. And sometimes do I overshare? Probably. Like, they don't need to see my surgery scars, some of those things. But, I'm trying to peel back some of that stuff, but it is easy to develop then that trust with people. If they really see you sweat, they understand you're going through some of the same challenges. So.
Awesome. Kristin, I might have gotten this from you, but do you ever prep someone with the intensity level of the conversation? Like this is just a little thing. Or now this is awkward, I have to bring this back up again, it's starting to become a pattern, or now this is pretty serious. I can't remember if you taught me this or not, Kristin, but what do you all think about sort of setting the tone of how the threat level?
Red alarm, song.
Code red. Is that a worthy thing to do?
I have a lot of staff who are very hard on themselves. And so I will often set that, because I have some staff who, if I tell them that, you really need to get your time card in on time, it will spiral into, you don't think that I am performing at the level I should be. And so I will often say, okay, this is small, but let me explain the logic. I need you to do this so you don't get on a list that is seen by all of our management, but it's okay. You're not going to lose your job.
I would agree. It's nice to let people know where to prepare, where this conversation is going, so they can take deeper breaths or hold on to their chair a little bit more. But really just allowing them to be, okay, this isn't serious. Let's take this conversation serious.
And one more question from the crowd, anybody else? Any more?
All right, let's thank our experts. I think their contact info, we got that slide off there that we can put up there. If you want to follow up with them, let's go. I'm gonna have to blow that slide up a little bit higher. But I'm sure they'll be happy to share their contact information with you as well. And Austin will send the slides out for you, because there's a lot of gold in those slides that they had to go pretty fast over the top, whether you're on Zoom today or you are here live. We also again want to thank STCU for sponsoring Ask the Experts, and Derek for coming down from Spokane, making it free to participate. We're going to do 2 drawings. So 3 drawings. All right, we got 3 door prizes today. So Sarah, you get to do the drawing. Anybody else in a business card throw in there fast? All right,
Okay,
here it comes.
we have a lovely basket from Kadlec, and we have wine glasses from STCU.
All right,
All right.
you definitely want one of these. All right, here we go. We're gonna
This is
do
Kadlec.
Julie from the Alzheimer's Association. Yay. All right, that's for the big basket. There's some great books in there. That's awesome. And then for the wine glasses is Lori from Port Pasco. All right. Glad you're both here today. Enjoy your prize. If you would also fill out the evaluation form before you go. If you're here, if you just leave it on the table, flip it over. So we can keep making these extremely valuable to so that you'll attend again and you'll invite your business colleagues. If you are on Zoom, scan the QR code so that we can get your feedback. I've also left a tool in the back by the cookies on receiving feedback constructively. Some of that you already heard today, but I've got 8 to 10 ways that you as a leader can receive feedback well, or something you can teach maybe at a staff meeting to your team on how to receive feedback effectively. All right, there was a flyer in the back of our next Ask the Experts. It is sales success strategies. Anybody want to make more money? Or help more people? Okay, because we're all in the sales business. If you're a nonprofit, you're in the sales business in a different way, right? So we're all in the sales business in some way. So May 23rd from 3 to 4:30, Ask the Experts are always the fourth Tuesday of the month. Again, you can come live or you can be live on Zoom. And so we'd love to have you. So please register for that as soon as it comes out. And hope you will join us again. So thanks again for coming, and may your business and or nonprofit continue to prosper in 2023. Have a good rest of your day.